Welcome back to The Look and Sound of Leadership, an ongoing series of executive coaching tips designed to help you be perceived in the workplace the way you want to be perceived. I'm Tom Henschel, your executive coach, and today we're talking about how to talk so people will listen. Carolina was one of 3 leaders helping spin off a division into a new company. She and her colleagues reported to the senior leadership team every week, and Carolina was driving them crazy. I'd coached her boss, Matt, the COO, when he was a rising junior executive at another company. He reached out to me now saying, "I'm worried the team is losing faith in her. I'm not. She and I meet all the time, and when we're one-on-one, she's not confusing at all. But when she gets in front of the team, it's a mess. You know what she needs? That sorting tool you taught me all those years ago. I still use that. Can you teach it to her?" "Sure," I said. "Does she know you're talking to me about coaching her?" He said, "She certainly does. I recommended she call you a couple years ago. She never did. Now it's not a choice. And she's fine with that. She knows she's not getting the results she wants." And so Carolina and I dove into the tool I call sorting and labeling. At our first session, referring to her boss, Carolina said, "Matt talks about this sorting tool like it's some magic wand." I laughed. "In a way it is. It uses a trigger that just seems to work every time. And it's not that hard." She said, "Well, now you've got me hooked. So what is it?" I said, "It's what happens when our brains hear a number." I'll give you an example. This sorting and labeling tool has 4 steps, 4 things for you to do. Okay, time out. Now here's what I believe. I believe that the instant I said the number 4, your brain started clicking into gear, making buckets or folders or slots or windows to receive 4 items. I believe my saying a number triggers something in your head that makes it easier for you to learn the tool than if I had said there are several steps or certain steps or important steps. When I say a number, you're more likely to listen to me. Asking to be sure, she said, "The magic isn't in which number you say, it's in using a number at all, right?" "Right," I said. "Well, with exception. You probably want to keep the number small. You don't want to say, 'We have 17 items on the agenda.' The magic is in picking a number your listeners can manage. I rarely say anything higher than 4. "Really?" she said. "But I've always got more than 4 things to say. Am I going to have to dumb everything down?" No, the tool doesn't want you to change your content. It just wants to give order to your content. It sorts your content and labels your content so people can follow along. It's like you create a map of your content and then guide them through the map. You can get as detailed as you want. You don't dumb anything down, but start with the bird's eye view. "It's like a table of contents," she said. "Yes," I agreed. A table of contents is a great way to think of it. I picture a hierarchy of folders, like on a desktop. At the highest level of hierarchy, I have to create one folder for my content. And I ask myself, what folder at that top level of hierarchy is going to lead logically to the lowest level? What'll get me down to those complex details? She looked off thinking. After a minute, she looked at me a little grief-stricken. My goodness, I've been talking about stuff that's probably 2 or 3 levels down. I've never really given them the bird's eye view. Do you suppose that's why everyone thinks I'm confusing?" "Maybe. Do you think so?" She said, "Well, if my content makes sense to me but not to anyone else, then I must not be doing a very good job." "Okay, so I'm supposed to use a number to sort my ideas. By the way, were you serious about there being 4 steps, or were you just making a point?" "No, the tool really has 4 steps," I said. "Can you teach me?" she asked. "Sure. So using a number, what we were just talking about, is actually the second step. Here's what comes first. Create a headline. Tell us the name of the folder at the top level of hierarchy. Tell us what we're talking about. 6 words or less, not a sentence. Short, something people can remember. A standalone headline." She asked, "Do you mean like for my presentation to senior leadership next week? That's going to get a headline?" "Yes," I said, "because if you do, you can start by saying, 'Today I'm going to talk about blah,' you name an idea, and everyone's mind turns in that direction. People get ready to listen. She laughed. That's wonderful. I love that. Golly, why haven't I always done this? Okay, so let me figure this out. Next week, I have two things to report on, separating the accounting functions and supplier facilities in Asia. Can I do that? Can I have two topics as my headline? I made a so-so gesture. I'd challenge you to see if there's one folder at the top level, but yeah, you could do those two as the big headline. Listen, she said, I think the top level of hierarchy is always the spin-off itself. That's always my topic. So maybe that's a given. I nodded. Good point. Yeah, maybe it is. So back to the tool. To help you learn the tool, between these two topics, accounting functions and supplier facilities, which would be easier to play with? Oh, I don't know. Supplier facilities, I guess. Okay, so for now, let's imagine supplier facilities becomes its own headline. So you could say, today, I'm updating you on Asian supplier facilities. And that headline would be accurate, right? Right, she said. Okay, so the headline's done. Now, when you think about the topic, how many things are there that you want to tell senior leadership about next week? Probably two, she said. Do you know what they are? Oh, sure, yeah. One is that, yes, we're going to have to move, and the other is about a provision in the contract. I made a timeout sign with my hands. And that, Carolina, was step 1, 2, and 3 in sorting and labeling. I looked at her. She was waiting for more. I went on. Step 1, supplier facilities, right? That created the headline. Step 2, use a number. That's everything you and I already talked about. Under that headline, there were two topics. That's step 2, use a number. Step 3, label the numbers. Give each number a label, and you did facilities and contracts. And that's 1, 2, and 3. Headline, numbers, labels. She nodded, replaying it, and then she said, What's number 4? I laughed. That's part of the magic of using numbers. Our brains don't want gaps. We want to fill the buckets that are in our head. I said there are 4 things, and you want to hear all 4 of them. I love that. Okay, so here's number 4. Transition with clarity. At every stop on the map, tell me where we are. Tell me which level of hierarchy we're at and which folder we're in. Oh, I don't do that, she said. Most people don't, I replied. She said, I think part of why I confuse people is because I jump around. My husband tells me I do that all the time. With sorting and labeling, you can jump around as much as you want as long as you use transition statements. What would that sound like? She asked. Oh, okay. Here you go. So, I want to talk for a minute about the supplier's facilities. We are tracking 3 factors. Before I tell you those, I want to explain a provision we found in one of the contracts. Okay, time out. So I jumped from 3 factors to a provision. But I think you could follow me, couldn't you? Yeah, she said. Well, that's step 4. Transition with clarity. She took in a breath and shook her head. Boy, I think I would jump around a lot less if I started doing that. It sounds hard to do. I shrugged. When the tool's new, it takes mental energy, like anything new, right? The 4 steps appealed to Carolina's engineering mind. She began using numbers even in casual conversations. She found it clarified her thinking. Using the 4 steps also changed the impression she made on the senior leadership team. Sorting and labeling gave her the look and sound of leadership. At the start of the episode, Carolina and Matt and I all talked about how this sorting and labeling tool has magic in it. Well, I really believe it does. I have witnessed it. When people can sort and label while they talk, they are seen as smart. It elevates them. It's why I've been talking about it on the show forever. One of the challenges that people raise is that sorting and labeling can make you sound stilted and robotic, to which I say, maybe, yes, when it's new, it might. It is a learned skill. Sorting and labeling asks you to grab your thoughts and label them before you dive into them. And for most people, that adds a step that they're just not familiar with. It is a skill to be learned. So in this part of the show, I want to help you learn sorting and labeling. I want to help every way I can. First, many of you may know, one of the many tools on the Essential Communications website is an infographic about sorting and labeling. I know a lot of you already have it. If you don't have it, please download it. It's free. The link is in the show notes. In addition to that, in this part of the show, I want to add a little flesh to each of the 4 steps, and I want to do a demo of sorting and labeling for you. I want you to hear what it sounds like. Okay, so ideas about each of the 4 steps. The 4 steps are: create a headline, use a number, label each number, and transition with clarity. So first up, create a headline. One big thought here. I'm going to guess that during the episode, you heard me define what I think a headline is to Carolina. I said 6 words, short, something people can remember. And I said it's a standalone headline. What makes it standalone is a pause. This entire first step doesn't count at all unless you say your headline and then take a breath. Pause. Stop talking. Give people's brains a second to all turn in the same direction. So that's the first idea about the headline. Say the headline, then pause. Okay, next idea. Step number 2, use a number. Using a number is the key to the whole tool. Out of the 4 steps, this is the centerpiece. This is where the magic happens. And by the way, once you can use numbers, the other steps get really easy. I know that using a number can feel like a big risk. Last month, on the episode called How to Answer Questions Powerfully, I told a story about when I was learning to use this tool. And I talked about all the worries I had about using number 2, using a number. Would I run dry? Would I think of extras? Was I going to forget one? I talked about how all those fears stopped me from using a number for some time until one day in a meeting, I took the leap. I said, I had 3 things, and I did fine with number 1, and I did fine with number 2, but I could not think of number 3. And I don't know where these words came from, but I said, let me stop there. And it was fine. Nobody cared. Let me stop there. It's a great phrase to use. And similarly, if you think of an extra, and if you've been using numbers all along, I just don't think it takes much to say, I'd like to add one more. You know where you can practice using numbers? Try using numbers when it's not important. Low risk practice. So you're putting a kid to bed and you say, we're going to do 3 things before lights out tonight. Or you come home and your partner says, how was your day? And you say, 2 things really caught my attention today. And you just practice, play with using a number and see what happens. That's all step number 2, use a number. Number 3, label each number. A good label is a phrase or a word. A good label is not an explanation. It's a label, like a subheadline. And your label is going to give us a way to think about whatever it is that you're talking about. So you use a number, and in my head I line up that many buckets, but at the moment they're all blank. When you give me a label, I will put it on my bucket. Your label is going to help me understand what we're talking about. And that's the core idea in this whole episode, right? How to talk so people understand you. Let me ask you a question. You have been listening to this episode so far. What was your experience when you heard the 4 labels, right? We create a headline and those labels. Did the labels make it easier for you to understand the concepts? I'm not asking if you remember them. I'm just asking, when you were hearing them, did it make it easier to understand the ideas? I hope it did. And that is what step 3 does. Label each number. And now, number 4, transition with clarity. Instead of talking about transition with clarity, it's going to be part of my demo, which I am going to do right after this month's gratitude. Gratitude to the Women's Impact Alliance. I've been coaching their women for years and years and years. The Women's Impact Alliance provide professional support to women around the world who work in social change. And I'm back coaching with them again, and it's just a pleasure. The women are always amazing. If you are a woman doing social or environmental change work, no matter where you are in the world, check out the Women's Impact Alliance. The link is on the show notes. Gratitude to the coaches who join our special interest group that focuses on executive coaching. We are part of ICF Los Angeles. If you're listening to this even close to real time, our next meeting is April 11th, 2025. We have experts coming to talk with us about AI in coaching. It is going to be great. But no matter when you're listening, if you're a coach, if you're interested in executive coaching, and if you would like to find community, come join us. The link is in the show notes. Gratitude, as always, to people who post reviews. Thank you for taking the time. It makes such a difference. This month in the UK, Apple Podcast listener Patrick Anthony 9. And here in the US, Apple Podcast listener Ninja the X wrote their review using the sorting and labeling format. I loved it, and I loved what you wrote. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who posts reviews. Really, it makes a difference. Okay, so now a demo. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to give you what is basically the same information twice. First, I'm going to say it the way I think most of us talk. And I'm going to do that for about 60 seconds. And then I'm going to stop, and I'm going to give you the same information sorted and labeled. And you'll get to see which one you like better. And afterwards, I'm going to deconstruct it because I really, really want you to see how it all fits together and how it all works. So all you have to do for the moment is just really sit back, have an experience, just listen. You ready? Here we go. One thing I always love to talk with people about is presentation skills because I've seen how it can change people's career paths. I work on it with people, and there is no question people who are good at it stand out. They look expert, and people see them as credible. So it can really help you tip the scales in your favor, especially when you explain things clearly so people understand them. Not everyone can do that. So it's another way to make you stand out. Another thing is that people who are good at it, they're good at phrasing things a certain way that people latch onto. People remember what they say, which is another way of standing out. Okay, time out. Shift gears, same material, sorted and labeled. One thing I always love to talk about with people is presentation skills. I have seen how presentation skills can change people's career path. I've worked with so many people on their presentation skills. What I have come to see is that no matter who they are, no matter what level they're at, we always end up talking about the same three things. Over and over, these three things improve people's presentation skills. Credibility, understandability, and memorability. Credibility, understandability, memorability. I want to talk about the third one first because a lot of people don't talk about it, and I think it's important. So, do you remember what the third one was? Memorability. If, as a presenter, you want your material to be memorable, and I hope you do, there are two easy ways to do it. First, mnemonics. Memory tricks, like credibility, understandability, and memorability. They're all one word. They all end in ity. They kind of sound like they rhyme. Mnemonics. And second, repetition. Say the same thing the same way every time. Credibility, understandability, memorability. Say the same thing the same way every time. Okay, time out. Demo's over. Now, you just had an experience. Here's the question I'd like you to ask yourself about the experience. I'd like you to ask which felt easier to understand. That's the episode, right? How to talk so people understand you. So as you listened to that, which was easier to understand? I hope it was number 2. And if it was, I want to point out some of the things you heard that I think make it easy to understand. So first, the headline. You remember I said If you don't pause, there's no headline. Well, in the first demo, there was no headline. I did not pause. I blew right past the words presentation skills, and I never said those words again. And the second time, not only did I pause, I repeated it in the very next sentence and then several times after that. And I do not think those repetitions sounded stilted or robotic. I think they sounded okay. Headline. Give them a headline. I used a number, right, and I tried to make it conversational. We talk about the same three things. I'm guessing at that point you got your buckets all lined up, and I labeled them, right? Third step, credibility, understandability, memorability. Then it was time to transition, and I did something weird. This was important in the demo. I asked you to jump to the third folder first. Now, look, I would never do that in a real presentation, right? If I wanted to talk about it first, I would put it first. But I could do it, and because I was being clear in my transitions, I'm guessing I did not lose you, and it was not a big deal. That's transition with clarity. And then I went on. So you're at folder number 3, right? Memorability. I open up that folder, and I tell you that inside that folder, there are 2 folders, and I label them. Mnemonics and repetition. So now we're a whole level down. There are folders within folders, and every time I simply sort and label them. Every time. And everyone understands where they are on the map, and that helps you be understood. I have one last question that's just fun. In the demo, I talked about the 3 presentation skills labels, right? I talk about the same 3 things over and over. And I'm wondering, do you remember any of them? I'm guessing you remember at least one. This is where I think part of the magic lies for sorting and labeling. Those presentation skills labels were really just for demonstration, right? I mean, they weren't content I wanted you to absorb. We're not talking about presentation skills. And yet, those stuck in your mind. They are there because our brains love sorting and labeling. If this challenge to talk so people understand you is something that you want to work on, please learn sorting and labeling and take a look in our archives for episodes that are going to support you in talking so people understand you. There are 3 categories you could look under: communication skills, presentation skills, and leading teams. If you are a leader of a team, sorting and labeling is going to help your team be better, I promise. 5 episodes that you might listen to are communicating with clarity, how to answer questions powerfully. There's a sorting and labeling kind of mini group in there. An episode from many, many years ago called Sorting and Labeling. The ideas in that are different and interesting. Sounding well-spoken and staying on track. All the links are in the show notes. Please help yourself. Okay, that's it for me. Until next time, I'm Tom Henschel. Thanks so much for listening.